Hi there, this is Phil Gurski, President and CEO of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting. You're listening to Quick Hits, a short podcast about usually all things terrorism. Today I have a treat for you. Normally on Quick Hits podcast, you just hear me droning on and on and on about my experiences and my thoughts on terrorism. But I thought I'd bring back a guest from an earlier podcast, an earlier, longer podcast in the Intelligent Look at Terrorism series to look at a current issue. So I brought back Mubin Shaikh, who many of you know. He was a former agent of the RCMP and CSIS in the Toronto 18 terrorism case in the mid-2000s. He's since gone on to an international career in talking about all things terrorism. And I brought him back to talk about the Canadian who claimed to be with ISIS, who apparently lied about it, and has now been charged with a terrorism hoax. So Mubin, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Phil, thanks for having me again.
So to walk us through, I understand from what I've seen before that you had some dealings with this guy from Burlington, Ontario, who of course made quite the news a couple of years ago in a series of interviews with the New York Times, Rukmini Callimachi. What was your dealings with this guy, Abu Huzayfah, who claimed to be an ISIS executioner?
Yeah, what a wild story. In 2016, I get a call from Rukmini Callimachi saying, "Hey, Mubin, I've just interviewed an ISIS member who lives maybe 30 minutes away from your house." I was, of course, shocked beyond belief. And so I, of course, inquired a bit more, and she told me that, listen, don't tell anybody yet, but I'm recording this interview with this guy. It's going to come out, when it comes out. But in the meantime, I think he really needs your help. Okay. And what she understood that to mean was I could bring to bear my experiences, my competencies, and try to help this guy. She legitimately thought that this guy was, he needed help, whatever that was, because in the discussions that he had with her, so she discovers his email. She emails him. He takes a little while, emails her back. She says, "Listen, I want to interview you." He takes a little while, interviews her back, actually shows up late to the interview. So, I mean, if there's some poor work ethic from this guy, it starts here. And then she does the interview with him. And then, so of course, afterwards, she calls me and I start to get involved. Now, she gave me his number, um, and I gave her my number to share to him. I contacted him. We got in touch with each other. We started meeting. Now, I go into this, I have to be very professional. Yes, I have had experiences with, CSIS and the RCMP, but I'm not an agent, right? I am a practitioner. I'm a professional. So I can't go into this thinking, oh, what's he doing or this or that. I just took it with an open mind. I assumed the story was true. I, number one, thought to myself, okay, I need to engage with him in such a way to, number one, determine, is this guy a threat? And number two, to help him with whatever issues he may have had. And so
Now,
that's how I
Mubin,
started off.
when you talk about helping him, what do you mean by that? So, are you talking about helping him reintegrate into Canadian
Yeah, I should have
society?
clarified that.
Yeah, okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
not helping him be ISIS, that's for sure.
I
Um,
didn't think that was the case. No.
yeah, yeah, no, it was to attempt a de-radicalization intervention. That was the point. It was to, do counseling or engage in some kind of, the counseling approach to see that, well, where are there PTSD issues with this guy? Did he actually go there? And, I told him from the beginning, don't admit any crimes to me. Okay. Because I did not want to be implicated in any subsequent court prosecution, because God knows I've been there and done that. Okay. And I just didn't want to be involved at that level. Okay, so I said, "Look, don't admit any crimes. Let's just discuss, what you went through or what you felt." And this was just really a way to gauge where this guy was, because the way he would respond to things, the subjects he would decide to want to talk more about, showed that he had more. He was invested in these topics over other topics. So there were many things that I did in order to try to understand his mindset, again, what was going on. So
Right,
hence,
because if you got involved in him confessing crimes and you elected not to share those with the
oh yeah,
RCMP or whatever, you could have been in deep shit
oh
because
yeah,
they would have said, "Well, you talked to this guy, you heard that he did X, Y, or Z. These are crimes under the criminal code. You didn't report them, so you could almost be accused of harboring a fugitive in that way." Then,
right, right. And again, I knew right from the outset that it's best for me to do that because I'm not going to get into that, all that prosecutorial stuff that I wanted to leave with the agency. That's their job. Let them do it. I'm not the investigator. I'm not
Right.
the journalist. My job is not to verify the story, et cetera, et cetera. So I just went into this with an open mind. I said, let me talk to him. Let me see where his mindset is at. At least if I could have a relationship with him and establish some kind of rapport with him, then I could influence him, in his future activities and so on. So I went into this very nicely, thinking this way, but my time, operationally told me that you need to be very suspicious. You need to be very
Right.
cautious. So my spidey sense was constantly on, saying that, you know what, is this? And it was an option. We thought, I thought, is this guy just totally making this all up? I
Hmm.
thought to myself, is this guy actually downplaying what he's done? Because that is the more common, hoax that ISIS members do. They downplay their involvement. They don't hype up their involvement. So
Well, of
these are
course not, because they're afraid at some point if
yeah,
they brag to the rest of the world on social media, I killed so and so, I did so and so. That's pretty damning evidence in a prosecution. Then.
yeah, you would think, because what happened after he did that? We said, well, sorry, his confession alone is not enough. And if anything, this in fact sent a message to ISIS members saying that, hey, look at this guy here claiming that he's getting away, getting off. The courts are not able to prosecute him, even if, and assuming, okay, his story is totally false. The ISIS members at least look at that and say, how can we learn from this? How can we? Because there are many cases where individuals have gone, not obviously admitting to their crimes, but denying the crimes, right? There was
Hmm.
this, Starfo guy in Germany. Remember, he
Right.
claimed, he claimed he was de-radicalized, and he played along, and then more evidence came out that this guy was putting bullets in the backs of people's heads. you know
Exactly.
so so anyways, as I spoke to him more, I could see, or at least he was showing, that he had symptoms of PTSD. He was
Hmm.
claiming tremors, night sweats, nightmares. In fact, in front of me, he would show tremors. So if I was discussing a particular topic, asking him, well, what about this and what about that, and how did you feel, and what do you think you should? And this guy's leg is just shaking away. In one case, he was supposedly recounting the looks on the children's faces when he would go on his police patrol, and he started crying. And so I said to myself, wow, this is like, look at the physiological reactions this guy's having. This is real.
Hmm.
Now, in hindsight, when you think back, that, my God, if this guy is in fact making it all up, it's some twisted cry for attention, and the lies have just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and taken on a life of their
Hmm.
own, this is all psychosomatic, in fact.
Hmm. So,
So,
how long, how many times, or over what length of period did you actually meet with this guy, Mubin?
yeah. So here's the thing. I talked to him, or at least physically met with him, at least once a week for about a year.
Wow,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
that's long.
That is long. That is long. And in fact, this is the thing. You have to take this long-term approach. That is very long. And not just that, the fact that after the podcast came out in 2018, finally, and all this stuff was exposed, and I confronted him, he immediately dropped the facade, totally became angry with me, devolved into the usual stuff that I've heard before. You're a hypocrite, you're a
Right,
sellout, you're not
right,
even a
right.
Muslim, you're this, and I just thought to myself, wow, this guy played along for a year, pretending that, yeah, I'm listening to this guy, and suddenly the facade dropped and pulled a complete 180 instantaneously. So that told me that it was all an act when he was talking with me, claiming that he was this, that. I couldn't know the details of the story, but at least I knew that there was an act
Mhm,
of some kind being put on.
mhm,
And as soon as that happened, we fell apart. It became very acrimonious, very acrimonious. There were messages sent back and forth between us, and whether it was in his anger or his stupidity or a combination of both, let's just say those messages were turned over to the RCMP, because they were openly talking about him knowing that his thing was creating his presence, his interviews were creating fear in the Canadian public. And he
Right.
knew by discussing this stuff that it was going to spread, and he was enjoying it. So all the legalities around what they have and how they're going to prove this and they prove that, they have more than they obviously admit.
Right. Because, of course, when the story broke, a lot of Canadians were very angry. Why isn't this guy in jail? Why hasn't he been arrested? Here's a guy who admitted to killing people in cold blood in the name of a heinous terrorist group of ISIS, and the Canadian government is doing nothing about it. In Parliament, the Conservatives took the Trudeau Liberals to task. Why are you sitting on your hands? Fast forward, and a week and a half ago, we learned that the RCMP has actually laid a charge of not terrorism, but terrorism hoax. Now, some people are saying, well, the RCMP uh, lost interest, or they didn't do their investigation properly, or they couldn't organize a piss up in a bar, and they're resorting to this as a sort of second best. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I don't share that view. I mean, I know what you're talking about. Some people saying that, well, this is just the RCMP, charging him because he made them look like fools. Okay, but I mean, we know how police or organizations in general work. No matter in any Western country, uh, contrary to how we might like, it's not a magic wand. It takes time. Like, you have to be thorough. You have to be very, very thorough. And so I understand that. Okay, fine. It took them this long. I mean, it's been 2 years since the podcast. two
Right.
years is actually not a lengthy investigation, really, in my eyes,
Not at
anyway.
all. Not at all.
Right. So I think what they've done, it's just, I think they did actually do their jobs properly in this case, in that they just checked off the boxes. It was trying to prove participation or travel. They did what they could. It takes time. They couldn't find it, and there was nothing there to support that. And obviously, what they saw was that this clown is still online, still claiming he's ISIS, bragging
Mhm.
how he got off, saying all these things. And at some point, the RCMP's got to say, you know what? It's either true or it's not true. And if it's
Right.
not true, then it's a hoax. And that's the
Right.
charge.
Should or get off the pot kind of thing. So moving forward, what do you think is going to happen in this case? So it's kind of lost a bit of its luster in the past week or so. It was big news when it hit. He will go to I believe go to trial. He has a court appearance in November, if I recall correctly. The penalty for terrorism hoax is only 5 years maximum. If the RCMP succeeds, if the Crown succeeds in the prosecution, I think a lot of Canadians will say that's it. He gets 5 years for leading us astray, costing us probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigative costs. What do you think is going to be the ultimate when this whole thing comes to an end? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, number one, I don't even think it's going to go to trial. I think he's going to plead guilty, and that'll be it. And the case will be over. And like you said, and where do we go with this? Like, a complete waste of time and money, scaring the Canadian public, raising the anxieties of Muslims and non alike. And there has to be some kind of punishment. And I'm suspecting, if because it seems like I mean, they were trying to help him, and he, what, it just seems that he got so caught up in his persona that he's just, there's, I don't know what he can do now, because the everybody has egg on their face in some sense,
Yeah.
right?
Like, how do you
And
walk back from this, right? Like, how do you undo what you've done over the past 3 or 4 years? This would be pretty
you
hard.
can't, you just can't.
Yeah.
So it's a lesson for the rest of Canadians, because people got caught up in the distraction of Abu Huzayfah, okay, with
Right.
this fake story, with because there's, the reality is that we have at least two actual ISIS killers in custody in Syria, both of
Hmm.
whom want to come back, Mohammed
Hmm.
Khalifa and Ahmed Mohammed.
Hmm.
Okay, so I mean, yes, his story is a case, is a hoax, but we have guys whose stories are not hoaxes, and the question is, what are we going to do about them in terms of prosecuting them, etc.
Great questions. One last question, Mubin. What have you learned from this, and how does this going to affect a time in the future when someone asks you to weigh in on a case of somebody who's come back from fighting with a terrorist group? Are you going to be
No,
reluctant, or are you going to jump at the chance?
I will jump at the chance. You know what? I'm not, just looking back at this. It is a validation for me in one sense, because one, I went into it open minded. I wasn't going to assume anything. Like, I had to assume the story was true and just go on the basis of that. But what I really appreciated about, my own self is the spidey sense that when
Hmm.
when it starts going, and when you're like, wait a second, when you take this approach, it just tells me more than ever that we need to be super cautious, super, super cautious when doing these assessments, and especially when claiming that somebody is de radicalized. Because as you and I both know, it happens a lot more than often.
Yeah.
And many times it just turns out very, very badly for everyone
Well,
involved.
exactly. And Mubin, if anybody in Canada will know what the real McCoy looks like, it's you, given your involvement with the Toronto 18. So listen, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. I was really curious to see because of your involvement, what your views were. I've seen some other views out there that I frankly disagree with, but I appreciate you taking the time, Mubin, and joining me on this short podcast.
Always a pleasure, Phil. Thank you.